You think you can get away?
Stop! Please stop!
Not until you learn! Stay down! How dare you!
Faster!
The alley behind the market was narrow, wet from evening rain, and almost empty except for one elderly black woman lying against the concrete wall, struggling to breathe. Her gray hair was disheveled. One side of her face was swollen. Her groceries were scattered across the ground beside her, tomatoes crushed beneath somebody's shoe. 3 men in black suits stood over her. One held her coat tightly against the wall. Another adjusted his cufflinks after striking her hard enough to split her lip. The third crouched low enough to whisper something into her ear before they left. "Tell Han Seo-jun we said hello." Then they walked away. No panic. No hurry. Because men like that believed fear only traveled in one direction. What they did not know, what nobody in that alley understood, was that the elderly woman bleeding onto the pavement was Josephine Okafor, the woman who had raised Han Seo-jun from childhood. Not his servant, not his employee, his mother in every way that ever mattered. She carried him out of a burning mansion when he was 6 years old, fed him when they had nothing, hid him under borrowed names while Korea's deadliest syndicates hunted him across the country. And now that little boy had become something Seoul whispered about carefully. Han Seo-jun, the most feared mafia boss in South Korea. The kind of man rival organizations did not threaten unless they were already prepared to disappear. The kind of man police commissioners spoke to politely. The kind of man whose enemies stopped using his name out loud. And someone had just beaten the only person he had ever truly loved. What happened after Han Seo-jun found out was not revenge. It was eradication. If you are new here, welcome to Korean Mafia Story Hub. Subscribe now and turn on notifications because stories like this only get darker from here. And if you are already part of this family, comment below right now. What do you think Korea's most feared mafia boss does when he discovers they touched the woman who raised him? Now let me tell you how it all began. Josephine Okafor arrived in Seoul with one suitcase, a winter coat that was too thin for the cold, and a phone full of missed calls from Nigeria she could not afford to answer. She stood outside Incheon Airport watching strangers move around her like fast water. Everything felt cold. The air. The language. Even the silence. The agency driver never smiled once during the trip into the city. Black sedan, tinted windows, no conversation, just Seoul glowing outside the glass like a city hiding secrets under neon lights. Then the gates opened. The Han estate sat behind high stone walls in complete silence. Not rich. Powerful. There was a difference. Josephine felt it immediately. Men in dark suits stood near the entrance pretending not to watch her. Cameras followed movement from corners she almost missed. Nobody laughed inside the house. Nobody relaxed. Madame Han greeted her personally. Elegant, controlled, beautiful in a way that felt untouchable. She studied Josephine carefully before speaking. "Can you keep your head down?" she asked quietly. Josephine nodded. Madame Han held her gaze for another long second. Then something unexpected happened. For the first time that entire day, someone looked at Josephine like she was a human being instead of luggage. And Josephine never forgot it. The house changed when Madame Han became pregnant. The silence became heavier. Guards doubled near the gates. Men whispered behind closed doors. Expensive doctors arrived at strange hours carrying black cases and nervous eyes. But inside her room, away from the empire outside, Madame Han became something else entirely. Human. Josephine saw it first during the sleepless nights. The morning sickness. The trembling hands. The fear Madame Han tried so hard to hide. And slowly, without either woman noticing exactly when it happened, Josephine became indispensable. She brewed ginger tea when the nausea came, brushed Madame Han's hair when she was too exhausted to move, sat beside her during long nights while rain hit the windows of the estate. Then one night, Madame Han whispered something into the dark. "I don't want this world to touch my son." Josephine looked at her quietly, because she understood exactly what kind of world existed inside those walls. Seo-jun was born during the first snowfall of winter. Small, angry, screaming at the world before he could even open his eyes properly. And before the nurses, before the guards, before the Han family, Madame Han reached for Josephine. "Hold him," she whispered. Josephine took the child into her arms, and without realizing it, she began loving him immediately. The peace offer arrived on a Wednesday. Private dinner. No guards. No weapons. Just respect between syndicates after years of blood hiding beneath business smiles. Madame Han hated it immediately. Josephine saw it in the way her hands stopped moving during breakfast, in the silence that followed every phone call, in the way she kept looking towards Seo-jun's room. "He should not go," she whispered one night about her husband. "Something feels wrong." But powerful men rarely survive by admitting fear. Chairman Han attended the meeting anyway. That evening, Madame Han found Josephine alone in the kitchen. Her voice was low, urgent. "There's a hidden corridor behind Seo-jun's room," she said. "If anything happens tonight, you take my son and run." Josephine froze. Madame Han grabbed her wrist tightly. "Promise me." Josephine nodded once. Then the screaming started downstairs. One gunshot. Then another. Then silence so heavy it felt worse than the bullets. Seo-jun was asleep when Josephine burst into his room. 6 years old, confused, terrified. She grabbed him against her chest, just as smoke began crawling beneath the door. Men were already moving through the house below them. Organized. Calm. Killing everyone. Josephine opened the hidden panel behind the wardrobe. Dark corridor. Cold concrete walls. Seo-jun started crying for his mother. Josephine held him tighter and stepped into the darkness, while blood entered the house behind them. For the next 12 years, they lived like ghosts. Different apartments. Different names. Different cities. Never staying anywhere long enough to feel safe. Josephine cleaned factories at night and packed vegetables in freezing warehouses before sunrise. Her hands cracked during winter. Her knees hurt constantly. But every evening she still came home carrying food for Seo-jun and pretending everything was fine. Seo-jun noticed anyway. Children who survive violence notice everything. He stopped acting like a child very early. While other boys played outside, Seo-jun studied quietly near the window of tiny apartments that smelled like instant noodles and detergent. Books stacked beside him. Lights on long after midnight. Josephine watched him carefully. There was anger inside him. Cold anger. The dangerous kind. So she taught him discipline instead. "Hatred makes loud men," she told him softly one night. "Patience makes dangerous ones." Seo-jun never forgot that sentence. Sometimes he woke screaming from dreams about the burning estate. Josephine would sit beside him until morning, rubbing his back while rain touched the windows. "You're safe," she whispered every time. And slowly, somewhere between fake documents, factory wages, and sleepless nights, Josephine stopped feeling like the woman protecting Seo-jun. She started feeling like his mother. They found him when he was 17. Not the police. Not the rival syndicates. The old Han loyalists. Men who had survived the massacre by disappearing before the blood reached them. One rainy evening, a gray-haired driver named Kang Min-ho knocked quietly on Josephine's apartment door and looked at Seo-jun for a very long time. Then he bowed. Not to Josephine. To the boy. After that, everything changed. Seo-jun was introduced to hidden rooms filled with men who still spoke the Han name carefully. He learned how money moved through corporations, How politicians were bought without cash ever changing hands. How fear controlled cities more effectively than bullets. But what frightened them most was not his intelligence. It was his patience. Seo-jun never rushed, never bragged, never lost control. He listened more than he spoke, watched more than he reacted. Josephine understood why. The fire inside him had not disappeared. It had frozen. One night, she found him staring at an old photograph of the burned estate. "I'm taking everything back," he said quietly. Josephine looked at him for a long moment. She should have told him no. Instead, she stepped closer and adjusted his collar the way mothers do. "Then do it properly," she whispered. And from that moment forward, Han Seo-jun stopped being a survivor. He became an heir. Seoul did not notice Han Seo-jun's return at first. That was the frightening part. Nothing exploded. No bodies appeared in the streets. No public war began. Instead, businesses started collapsing quietly. Accounts froze overnight. Entire shipping routes vanished from syndicate control without explanation. Men disappeared between dinner and sunrise. One rival boss walked into a meeting with 30 bodyguards and discovered every exit already occupied by silent men in black suits waiting for instructions that never needed to be spoken aloud. Fear spread slowly. Then all at once, people began whispering the Han name again. Older criminals looked nervous when Seo-jun entered rooms. Younger ones stopped making eye contact entirely. Because Seo-jun was not like his father. His father ruled through power. Seo-jun ruled through certainty. If he decided something would happen, it happened. Josephine watched the transformation quietly from the apartment window of their newest home. Tailored suits. Black cars. Men bowing before the boy she once carried through hidden corridors. But sometimes late at night, Seo-jun still sat silently at the kitchen table while she made tea. Still calm. Still controlled. Only colder now. Then one winter morning, the final rival syndicate collapsed completely. And Seoul finally understood something terrifying. Han Seo-jun had not returned to rebuild the underworld. He had returned to own it. Josephine left the empire quietly. No arguments. No dramatic goodbye. One morning, she simply told Seo-jun she wanted a smaller life. A normal one. So she moved into a modest apartment above a grocery store where nobody bowed when she entered rooms. She planted tomatoes beside the window, sang softly while cooking, spoke to Nigerian relatives every Sunday night like the underworld did not exist beneath Seoul's lights. Seo-jun bought her the apartment without telling her. She pretended not to know. At first he visited often, then less. Then sometimes only phone calls between meetings and violence and endless responsibility. Neither of them blamed the other. That was the tragedy. Power had pulled Seo-jun into one world, while Josephine quietly remained in another. But enemies never stop searching for weakness. Deep inside the ruins of a destroyed syndicate, surviving men began reopening old files connected to the Han massacre. Old servant records, escape theories, forgotten names buried beneath decades of dust. And there it was. Josephine Okafor, Nigerian domestic worker. Missing after the massacre. One surviving syndicate lieutenant stared at the file for a very long time before smiling slowly. Because he finally understood something the others had missed years ago. The only way to hurt Han Seo-jun was through the woman who taught him how to love. It happened on a rainy Thursday evening behind the market. Josephine had just finished buying vegetables when the black van stopped beside the alley. 3 men stepped out. Calm. Professional. Like men arriving for work. One grabbed her shopping bag. Another slammed her against the wall before she could scream. The third searched her pockets while rainwater mixed with blood beneath her shoes. "Where is Han Seo-jun?" one of them demanded. Josephine said nothing. The first punch shattered her lip. The second dropped her to her knees. Still, she said nothing. Because even now, after everything, her first instinct was still to protect him. When they finally left, they took her identification, bank cards, phone, and apartment keys. Within days, she became trapped inside a nightmare invisible people understood too well. No documents. No money. No proof she existed. Her landlord forced her out quietly. Shelters turned her away. Strangers walked past her bruised face without slowing down. And still she refused to call Seo-jun. I won't pull him back into blood, she whispered to herself each night. Weeks later, a young journalist named Choi Min-seo noticed the elderly black woman sleeping near a church bench and asked a simple question nobody else had asked. What happened to you? Josephine started crying before she could answer. And that story would soon reach the entire country. Han Seo-jun discovered the article at 2:13 in the morning. A junior associate slid the phone across the table. During a meeting, nobody suddenly cared about anymore. Seo-jun read the headline once, then went completely still. An elderly black woman sat bruised beside a church wall in the photograph, gray hair messy, coat torn, eyes exhausted beyond words. Josephine. For several seconds, nobody in the room breathed. Then Seo-jun quietly asked one question. Who touched her? The city changed after that. Bank accounts vanished overnight. Safe houses burned empty before sunrise. Men connected to the attack disappeared one by one like Seoul itself was swallowing them whole. No speeches. No public threats. Only consequences. 3 days later, Seo-jun entered a small hospital room carrying fresh clothes in his hands. Josephine looked up slowly from the bed. The moment their eyes met, his entire mask cracked. I'm sorry, he whispered like a child again. Josephine reached for his face immediately. No, she said softly, you came back. Weeks later, the violence finally ended. Josephine moved into a quiet home, overlooking the mountains outside Seoul, where the air smelled clean and peaceful. And every Sunday morning, Han Seo-jun personally prepared tea for her in complete silence. Not as a mafia boss. Not as a ruler. Just as the little boy she once carried through fire. The promise had never been broken,